Meet the family, the royals of forced romance. Alright, buckle up, because you're about to be introduced to a British family so steeped in tradition. They practically steep their tea by reading the Queen's speeches backwards. This isn't your run-of-the-mill. Oh, they have a garden and a dog family. No. This lot have mastered the ancient art of forced engagements with all the subtlety of a bloke shouting oi in a silent library. Picture a sprawling manor somewhere in the English countryside, where the lawn is so perfectly trimmed it looks like it's been photoshopped, and the wallpaper has been judging every guest since Queen Victoria's era. This is the kind of place where the phrase, stiff upper lip, was invented, probably by someone trying desperately not to cry into their cucumber sandwich. The family patriarch. Let's call him Sir Reginald because what else would he be called? Embodies everything British, a face permanently etched with polite disapproval, an unwavering devotion to Earl Grey tea brewed exactly at 3:07 p.m., and a talent for avoiding actual feelings as if they were dodging a bill collector. Then there's Lady Agatha, who runs the household with the precision of a royal guard but hides a simmering volcano of passive-aggressive commentary behind those perfectly arched eyebrows. Her idea of a heated debate is a barely perceptible sigh during dinner service, usually timed to coincide with the mention of any suitor who isn't quite suitable. And the younger generation, the very reason this tragicomic saga exists, our protagonist. Let's call him Arthur because if you don't pick an old British name, what are you even doing? Is caught in a web of expectations, thicker than a double-decker, stuck in London traffic. Arthur is the unwilling star of this engagement farce, stuck between duty and please. Someone save me from this roast beef dinner and the conversation about the weather. You see, this family takes tradition so seriously that forcing an engagement isn't just a suggestion, it's practically a national sport. Think Wimbledon, but replace the tennis with awkward family dinners, polite smiles that scream please make it stop, and a relentless schedule of social events designed to pair off the unwilling like a matchmaking agency run by a particularly nosy corgi. The forced engagement itself, well, it was announced over a Sunday lunch that felt longer than a British winter and about as warm. The whole thing was presented with the enthusiasm of someone reading the bus. Timetable out loud, polite, obligatory, and utterly devoid of joy. Yet, like the latest Netflix drama no one really wanted but couldn't stop watching, the gossip spread faster than Marmite on toast, leaving no Yorkshire pudding unturned. Upper lips and polite how do you dos? There's a glorious mess of emotions simmering, confusion, despair. That dreadful awkwardness that only a forced romance in a British family can brew. And as much as the whole affair is a masterclass in subtle torture, you can't help but watch with a mix of horror, fascination, and a desperate urge to pour another cup of tea. Because if there's one thing the British do better than anyone else, it's pretending they're perfectly fine, while their entire world is quietly falling apart around a very formal table setting. The engagement announcement that broke the nation's patience. Now, let's set the scene. Sunday roast. The smell of overboiled vegetables and burning resentment fills the air. A leg of lamb sits proudly in the center of the table, like it knows something no one else does. The table's been set with great-grandma Edith's best china, which hasn't seen daylight since the Queen's Golden Jubilee. Because apparently, nothing says let's ruin someone's life like bone-white porcelain and silver-plated forks. Everyone's in attendance. Uncle Bernard in his usual moth-bitten waistcoat, Aunt Maureen wielding a salad tom like a passive-aggressive weapon, Cousin Charlotte, who hasn't smiled since 2006, and of course, Arthur and Beatrice, her blushing victims, sorry, lovebirds. They're seated directly across from each other, like contestants in a psychological warfare documentary hosted by David Attenborough. The mood tense, but oh so British. Smiles painted on. Conversation about weather deployed like emergency small talk CPR. Everyone pretending not to know exactly why they've been summoned with such ceremony, because nothing screams subtle disaster like a surprise family dinner with matching napkin rings. Then it happens. Sir Reginald clears his throat, a sound so ancient and foreboding. You'd think he was about to summon the ghost of Churchill. He taps his knife gently on his wine glass. Clink, clink. Silence falls, except for the sound of someone's fork nervously clattering onto their plate, probably Arthur's. And with the emotional nuance of a tax notice, Sir Reginald declares, "We are delighted to announce the engagement of Arthur and Beatrice, a union of families, tradition, and shared values." Shared values, of course, being unbearable politeness and emotional repression. Cue the reactions, a masterclass in restrained chaos. Aunt Maureen visibly chokes on her Earl Grey, which, for her, is basically screaming. Uncle Bernard mutters, "Good Lord," into his potatoes. Dad, poor. Emotionally constipated dad flashes that iconic British expression that says, "I'm dead inside, but too polite to object." It's the kind of moment where everyone wants to stand up and scream, but instead they nod politely with the energy of a hostage video. Arthur, meanwhile, looks like he's been hit by a double-decker bus of obligation. His face twitches just slightly, you almost miss it, but if you zoom in emotionally, you'd see a man internally building a raft out of Yorkshire, puddings, and plotting his escape to the Lake District. And Beatrice. Oh, Beatrice is doing her best I'm absolutely thrilled face, which in British terms means her smile is precisely 1 millimeter wider than usual. Her eyes scream, "Get me out of here." But her mouth says, "How lovely. Thank you ever so much." Let's not forget Charlotte, who whispers, "Well, that's convenient," under her breath like she's narrating a true crime documentary. Because everyone knows this is not a love match. This is a negotiation between two families who think romance is a French cheese, not a real concept. And yet, no one says anything real. No one dares to. That would be dramatic. And if there's one thing the British fear more than commitment, it's drama at the dinner table. So they raise their glasses, mutter a collective "how wonderful," and sip their wine like it's laced with regret, which, honestly, it might as well be. In that moment, time stands still. The gravy congeals. The air thickens with the weight of unspoken truths. A union has been announced not between two people, but between two entire histories of unresolved expectations and the crushing weight of tradition, dressed up in doilies and duck-a-l'orange. So yes, this was the engagement announcement that broke the nation's patience. Not because it was shocking, not because it was scandalous, but because it was exactly what everyone expected and dreaded ... all at once. And in true British fashion, we all smiled, poured another cup of tea, and pretended it was fine. Because what else can you do, really, when your emotions are trapped somewhere between the roast potatoes and your suppressed dreams? The reluctant groom, more confused than a Brit in flip-flops. Arthur never asked for this. He didn't ask to be a pillar of the family name, or to be part of a merger disguised as a marriage. No, Arthur simply wanted three things in life: peace, privacy, and a decent cup of tea that didn't come with emotional expectations. But here we are, betrothed, baffled, and barely breathing through the madness. If anxiety wore brogues and a bodie, it would look exactly like Arthur at that dinner table. To the outside world, he's the picture of quiet British manhood, polite, punctual, and perpetually apologizing for existing. But on the inside, oh, darling, on the inside, Arthur is screaming louder than a startled pigeon in Trafalgar Square. Let's rewind a bit. Arthur was raised on tradition, cricket on Sundays, emotional repression on weekdays, and the kind of family pride that feels suspiciously like a full-time job. So when his parents, Sir Reginald and Lady Agatha, lovers of legacy and lukewarm shepherd's pie, suggested a marriage to Beatrice, the daughter of another thoroughly unimpressed aristocratic unit, Arthur did what any good British son would do. He nodded and quietly died inside. It's just for the family, Arthur, his mother had said, brushing imaginary crumbs off her skirt with all the compassion of a tax auditor. She's very respectable, his father had added, as though Arthur were being sold a second-hand Volvo. So Arthur, being Arthur, smiled and pretended it was all fine, like one of those people who says no worries at all, while very clearly worrying about everything. Now he finds himself sitting in his flat, if you can call a two-bedroom in Croydon, with damp ceilings and a haunted toaster flat, staring into a mug of peachy tips like it might reveal the meaning of life. His inner monologue, an absolute Shakespearean tragedy. I.F. Shakespeare had grown up in Essex and drank too much supermarket brand gin. Right? Option 1, marry Beatrice. Live out the rest of my life as a character from a BBC period drama. Probably die from passive-aggressive tea poisoning. Option 2, fake my own death. Too dramatic. Mom would absolutely ruin my funeral with doilies. Option 3, run away, disappear. Change my name to Derek, open a scone shop in the Lake District. Be free, be alone. Be happy, but also, it's the Lake District. It rains sideways, constantly. Option 4, just talk to Beatrice like an adult and be honest about my feelings. Too risky. Too emotional. Far too un-British. Cancelled immediately. This, you see, is Arthur's tragic flaw. He's a man who's so polite. He'd rather marry the wrong person than make anyone uncomfortable for 5 minutes. He once apologized to a chair he bumped into. Emotional expression is not in his vocabulary, but passive panic is. And Beatrice, lovely enough. In a we'd make brilliant. Acquaintances who nod at each other in the Waitrose cheese all sort of way. But soulmate. Not unless soulmate now means person you sit next to in silence while both scrolling Instagram under the table. And so, as the engagement announcement echoes in his ears and the weight of tradition looms like a rain cloud, made of passive disappointment, Arthur prepares himself for the next stage, pretending he's thrilled about the wedding while quietly scheduling nervous breakdowns between cricket fixtures. He practices his smile in the mirror. It's less happy groom and more I've just seen the bill for centerpieces. He's perfected the nod, not too excited, not too miserable, just the right amount of yes. I am absolutely thrilled to throw away my personal agency in the name of roast dinners and inheritance law. And when it all gets too much, he makes tea. Copious, Olympic-level amounts of tea. Tea for stress. Tea for panic. Tea to delay actually doing anything at all. If caffeine were an emotion, Arthur would be an opera. His kettle's been boiled so many times, it's filing for workers' rights. In the end, Arthur's not a villain. He's not even a tragic hero. He's just ... confused, bewildered, stuck in a life that looks fine on paper but feels like wallpapering over a collapsing wall. So yes, our dear Arthur, reluctant groom, emotional hostage, king of lukewarm rebellion, is more confused than Brit in flip-flops during a heat wave. And if anyone asks how he's doing, he'll smile and say, not too bad, all things considered. Which, of course, in British translates to send help. The bride's silent rebellion, passive-aggressive tea and crumpets. Beatrice was the kind of woman who could start a war, with nothing but a raised eyebrow and a dry comment about humidity. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw tantrums or chuck engagement rings into fountains. No, darling. She brewed tea and withheld the crumpets. Her rebellion wasn't loud. It was lethal in that classically British way, sugar-coated, socially acceptable, and utterly soul-crushing. A war waged in subtle size and strategically sharpened, oh, really, S. It started the week after the announcement, or as Beatrice referred to it in her diary, the event of mild inconvenience and lifelong regret. She began executing what can only be described as a domestic psychological thriller. one passive-aggressive ritual at a time. Exhibit A, the tea test. In Britain, the way you make someone's tea is a direct reflection of your emotional temperature toward them. And Beatrice, once known for her textbook Earl Grey with just a splash of milk, the kind that soothed the soul and healed generational trauma, suddenly started forgetting how Arthur liked it. Too strong, no sugar, then 3 sugars, then black, like her mood. The kind of tea that tastes like it was brewed by someone who's imagining your funeral playlist. Oh, did I put salt in it instead of sugar? Silly me. Beatrice, smiling with the calm fury of a Victorian ghost. Arthur drank every cup, of course, because he's British and would rather have his internal organs shut down than say, "This tea tastes like betrayal." Exhibit B, Crumpetgate. Now, Beatrice never denied a crumpet. She was raised on them. They were her emotional support food, her go-to coping mechanism, and frankly the only joy left in her engagement. But one day, after a particularly tense afternoon of wedding planning, do we really need doves? They're symbolic, Arthur. Of what? Avian chaos? She served everyone crumpets. Everyone but Arthur. Oh, I thought you were watching your carbs. There it was. The nuclear bomb of British rejection. No yelling, no accusations. Just a weaponized carbohydrate exclusion. He was cut off from the buttered, golden roundness of affection. And she didn't even flinch. The room went quiet. Even the kettle stopped whistling, possibly out of respect. Exhibit C, weaponized weather chat. The British don't talk about feelings. They talk about the weather and mean feelings. And Beatrice had mastered the craft. Arthur, do you think the guest list a bit ... much? Beatrice, sips tea, doesn't blink. Oh, lovely weather we're having. Translation, I will end you if you bring up this wedding one more time. When asked by Aunt Maureen if she was excited about the big day, Beatrice replied, "It'll be something. That's it. Not lovely. Not special. Just ... something." That word alone sent Aunt Maureen into a spiral so intense. She took her Victoria sponge and left early. Beatrice's inner monologue, a tour of suppressed chaos. Now, let's take a brief stroll through the mental corridors of our reluctant bride. They're clean, orderly, and screaming into a pillow made of doilies. Do I want to spend the rest of my life with Arthur? He's fine. In the way that lukewarm soup is fine. Would I rather fake appendicitis than sit through another floral arrangement discussion? Absolutely. Will I say anything? Of course not. I'm British. I'll simply make him feel my disapproval via the strategic placement of cold scones and frosty stares. The rebellion no one noticed, but felt deeply. And that's the genius of it. Beatrice didn't say no. She didn't make a scene. But she built a wall of steely politeness so tall, so impenetrable. It made Hadrian's wall look like a polite suggestion. Her friends noticed, especially Charlotte, who whispered, "She's about 3 crumpets away from starting a civil war." Her mother noticed too, but chose denial, saying, "It's just pre-wedding nerves. Perfectly normal." It was not normal. Beatrice was orchestrating an emotional protest, more powerful than a full-on confrontation. Because you can argue with a person shouting. You cannot argue with someone offering you cold tea and a half smile that says, "I know where the poison goes." Conclusion, the queen of no without saying no. So here she stands, Beatrice, the bride-to-be, a silent revolutionary in pastel cashmere, a woman who turned tea into a statement, who rejected a relationship with the power of carefully withheld marmalade, who screamed no thank you without uttering a single word. And in true British fashion, everyone pretended not to notice, because if there's one thing worse than emotional suffering, it's acknowledging it. Her rebellion is quiet, cold, and perfectly brewed and served with just a hint of bitterness and one sugar cube of despair. And as she buttered yet another crumpet, this one just for herself, Beatrice thought, very calmly, "If I have to wear that dress, someone's going to bleed. family traditions, or how to force someone into matrimony like it's afternoon tea. Yes, British family traditions, that charming blend of emotional repression. Because what better way to decide the course of someone's entire romantic future than over a lukewarm cup of builder's tea and a passive-aggressive pudding? Let's rewind a little before the great engagement announcement of doom. Before Arthur began blinking in Morse code for help. Before Beatrice perfected the art of smiling while dying inside. There were the traditions. And by traditions, I mean a carefully curated psychological obstacle course disguised as wholesome family bonding. It all begins, as most traumas do, with a Sunday dinner, you see. In normal households, Sunday dinner is about roast potatoes, football scores, and arguing over who's doing the washing up. But in this particular British household, it was courtship by casserole. You'd sit down expecting gravy, and somehow end up with a fiancé. Picture it, Grandfather Reginald, who hasn't expressed a genuine emotion since the Thatcher era, gives a solemn nod to Aunt Maureen across the table. This, in family code, translates to, we must ensure the bloodline continues before the next coronation. Beatrice is still spooning trifle into her mouth when someone casually asks if she's thought about settling down, which, in British terms, is basically a marriage proposal with extra custard. And then the matchmaking begins. No, not with swipes or apps or, God forbid, emotional compatibility. With subtlety, with suggestion. With cousin Charlotte saying things like, Arthur's always been stable, hasn't he? Over roast lamb, which is code for, he's boring enough to trap in matrimony and unlikely to run. Meanwhile, Arthur is halfway through his Yorkshire pudding, trying to remember if he ever explicitly agreed to be part of this arrangement or if he was just offered an extra roast parsnip and accidentally nodded. Because that's how it works in this family. You nod once at the wrong moment and suddenly you're engaged. And don't get me started on the tea talks. Those deeply terrifying one-on-one chats over a cuppa with elderly relatives who smile while emotionally blackmailing you into lifelong commitment. Beatrice once went to make tea for her gran and returned betrothed. It's like being mugged in broad daylight by lace doilies and nostalgia. Then there's the legacy pressure. The stories of how everyone else got married at 22 and made it work, which is code for cried in separate bedrooms until it was socially acceptable to die. One uncle got married because he lost a bet in a pub. One aunt married her cousin's best mate because he had a reliable Vauxhall Astra and decent manners. And now those marriages are held up as inspirational tales of enduring love. Mostly because no one dares admit they were exercises in mutual quiet suffering, stark stiff etiquette, and subtle life-ruining rituals carried out under the guise of civility. And the piece de resistance, the family scrapbook, dragged out like a medieval scroll at every major holiday. Pages of sepia-toned, aggressively heterosexual couples, standing 3 inches apart in photos with the emotional warmth of tax returns. Look at how happy they were, says someone, pointing to a photo where the bride looks like she's trying to blink a distress signal. Beatrice once joked that the scrapbook should be titled, Love in the Time of Emotional Unavailability. No one laughed. They thought she was being cute. So yes, this engagement didn't come from a grand romantic gesture, or shared hobbies, or even a meaningful conversation. It came from a series of increasingly bizarre family traditions, all of which orbit around the belief that romance is optional, but politeness is mandatory. Because in this house, refusing a proposal arranged over Victoria sponge is ruder than microwaving tea. So here we are, a union not born of love, but of roast dinners, gentle coercion, and the national inability to say no, without apologizing twice and offering biscuits. Welcome to Britain, where marriage is sacred, tradition is law, and your feelings, well, they can go queue up quietly like everyone else. The awkward family gatherings, British small talk meets Titanic emotional iceberg. Family gatherings. The sacred British tradition of pretending Everything's fine while emotionally combusting under the weight of social etiquette and undercooked peas. Truly, nothing brings people together like tea, passive aggression, and a collective unwillingness to address the flaming elephant tap dancing in the room, wearing a wedding veil. Picture it, the living room, beige of course, always beige. A space that hasn't changed since 1983 and still smells faintly of furniture polish, boiled carrots, and unresolved trauma. The gas fire is on, not because it's cold, but because someone insists it creates a cozy atmosphere. Despite everyone sweating through their cable knit jumpers like they're in a sauna, run by disappointment, Arthur and Beatrice are present, naturally, are dearly unbetrothed. They're seated on opposite ends of the room, both pretending to be deeply engrossed in the same copy of Country Life magazine, as if photos of heritage chickens will save them from the social abyss they've fallen into. The air thick, not with love or nostalgia, oh no, thick with tension. The kind you could butter and spread on a crumpet. And what does the British family do in such emotionally volatile circumstances? They talk about the weather, endlessly, pointlessly, hilariously. Bit nippy out, isn't it? Yes. Wine had a bite to it. Rain was coming in sideways in Kent this morning. Sideways. Sideways, my friend. The true measure of emotional despair. No one ever says what they actually mean. That would be rude. That would be making a fuss. So instead, conversations are conducted entirely in code. How's Arthur holding up, then? Actually means, is he dead inside yet? Beatrice seems. Well is a polite translation of, she looks like she's one bad. Scoot away from running off to join a cult in Cornwall. Meanwhile, in the corner, Aunt Maureen is accidentally dropping loud hints about her own wedding minus 1,962, white gloves, proper hymns, and a groom who didn't have commitment issues disguised as gardening hobbies. She offers Beatrice a biscuit, and this is important, not her favorite. A declaration of war, in British terms. Uncle Bernard, sipping lukewarm tea and muttering something about the good old days, when marriages were arranged quietly and everyone just got on with being miserable. Occasionally offers Arthur unsolicited advice about stepping up as a man. Arthur responds by blinking slowly and picturing a life in a remote Scottish lighthouse with no Wi-Fi. Let's not forget the children, small, sticky-faced creatures who run in and out of the room, completely immune to the social nuclear fallout swirling around them. One of them hands Beatrice a drawing that says happy wedding in glitter glue. Her eye twitches. She thanks the child. She wants to eat the drawing and flee the country. Then comes the climax of awkward. Someone suggests a toast to the happy couple. Glasses are raised. Arthur nods like he's been asked whether he likes jam. Beatrice smiles, not with her mouth, but the kind of restrained eye narrowing that screams, if I must perish in this performative nightmare, I shall do so with grace and caffeine. And everyone clinks glasses, sips their warm Prosecco, and continues discussing things like pension reform and bin collection days, because heaven forbid they acknowledge the human tragedy unfolding right before their doily covered eyes. This is the British way. No shedding, no tears, just years of family pressure, generational guilt, and emotionally charged glances disguised as polite indifference. So yes, these family gatherings aren't just awkward. They're an Olympic event in emotional suppression. A Titanic full of feelings, heading directly toward the iceberg of outdated tradition. All while the band plays Jerusalem and someone passes the Victoria sponge. And we smile. We always smile. Because if we don't, someone might notice. And then where would we be? Talking about it. Like Americans. God forbid. The secret diary of a forced fiancé. What they'd really say if politeness didn't exist. Dear Diary, otherwise known as Engaged. They say every love story begins with a spark. Mine began with a nod over trifle and a death sentence disguised as a compliment. You two would make such a lovely pair. Translation: your misery would match nicely. Cheers, Auntie Sheila, Beatrice, and I, the star-crossed lovers. And by star-crossed, I mean randomly assigned by two meddling families over roast lamb. Our chemistry is electric, in the way static cling is. Harmless, awkward, and mostly unwanted. Today's inner monologue. Brought to you by cold tea and hot regret, right? So we're sitting in the drawing room again. Beatrice is across from me, politely flipping through country life. Like she's trying to summon the ghost of her lost will to live. I nod. She nods. We're practically not flirting at this point. It's erotic in the most soul-crushing way. Mums just asked me to try on Granddad's engagement ring. Yes, his ring. From 1949. It smells like damp memories and disappointment. Apparently, it's a family heirloom and not just a rusted band of emotional entrapment. I smile and say, of course, lovely idea. What I want to say, brilliant. Can't wait to accessorize my lifelong regret. The family strategy, aka psychological warfare with Yorkshire pudding. Every meal is now a test. If Beatrice passes me the gravy, that's a sign we're bonding. If I refill her wine glass, that's intimacy. If we survive Sunday lunch without passive-aggressively stabbing each other with salad forks, that's basically foreplay. They're watching us, diary. Uncle Bernard winks every time we share a plate of chips. That man hasn't winked since the Falklands. So either he's having a stroke, or they're convinced this is romance. Beatrice's silent scream, as interpreted by me. She's smiling again. That smile, the one that says, I've accepted my fate, but only because homicide carries a life sentence. I feel you, B. Sometimes I wonder if she's also secretly plotting her escape. Maybe she's got a suitcase buried under the garden gnomes. Maybe she's Googled how to fake your own death using nothing but tea bags and a well-timed power cut. Either way, we're united in quiet rebellion, like the Titanic string quartet, playing while the ship sinks only with more digestive biscuits. Daily highlights, got told we'd make sturdy children. Am now considering a vow of celibacy. Tried to speak to Dad about the engagement. He said, marriage is character building, which roughly translates to, I, too, have regrets, join me, son. Grandma Edith gave us a wedding planning binder. It's pink, it's floral, it's labeled, forever bacon's here. I nearly burst into tears next to the fig rolls. Well, day 42 of being Britain's most emotionally repressed hostage. The best love stories don't start with forced hand-holding in front of a cheese board, but instead, I'll nod, I'll smile, I'll say, how lovely, while internally screaming into the abyss. Because in Britain, emotions are for private weeping during the bake-off finale, not the dinner table. Final thought, marriage might be beautiful. It might be fulfilling. It might even, in a different timeline, involve love. But in this timeline, it's more like joining a very exclusive cult, with cake and seating charts, and the ever-present threat of small talk about wallpaper. So yes, diary, I am still alive, barely trapped in a relationship. That's 80% tradition, 10% parental pressure, and 10% the lingering hope that someone objects at the ceremony, preferably loudly and with good cause. Until then, I'll smile politely, sip my tea, and mentally compose my next breakdown in iambic pentameter. Yours, the future Mr. Beatrice, possibly, if we survive till June. The great escape plan that was about as effective as a soggy crumpet. Ah, escape. That glorious, mythical concept we all dream of when life hands us something truly dire. Like a forced engagement orchestrated by Aunt Maureen, over a lukewarm cup of tea and a plate of jammy Dodgers. Now, if you think the British are too polite for rebellion, let me introduce you to Arthur, our reluctant groom and low-key escape artist. The man once tried to fake appendicitis during a Sunday lunch just to avoid a conversation about wedding venues. Unfortunately, he chose the wrong side to clutch and was offered a runny and a nap instead. Let's go back to the beginning. The engagement had been announced with all the emotional warmth of a parking ticket, and suddenly Arthur found himself hurtling toward a future filled with monogram towels, floral centerpieces, and Beatrice's terrifyingly enthusiastic cousin, Miranda, who had opinions about napkin folds. And so the great escape plan was born, or at least coughed feebly into existence over a pint of bitter and a very suspicious Scotch egg. Step 1. The sudden illness strategy. Arthur attempted spontaneous tonsillitis. The night before a brunch with Beatrice's family, he rehearsed the hoarse voice, threw on a dressing gown, and even refused his bacon bap. But instead of sympathy, his mother clucked, said, "Well, you'll still look fine in the engagement photos," and handed him a lemsip. British parents, you see, don't believe in illness unless it involves a missing limb or a death certificate. Step 2. Misplace the ring. Desperate times. Arthur accidentally lost the family heirloom engagement ring, which had the charm of a medieval thumbscrew and probably the same comfort level. He buried it deliberately with full ceremony in the garden under the rosemary bush. Beatrice found it 2 hours later, still in the box, still with the tag that said resized for Beatrice. Do not lose. The woman is part bloodhound, part wedding planner, and 100% done with Arthur's nonsense. Step 3. Emotional sabotage over tea. At a tense family tea, the kind where the clinking of china is louder than the conversation, Arthur thought he'd cleverly imply he wasn't ready. You know, cast the waters. "I just think we're rushing things, don't you?" he said, stirring his tea like it held the meaning of life. Beatrice blinked, smiled politely, and replied, "Oh, Arthur, don't be silly. The marquee is already booked." And just like that, his last shred of hope drowned in his Earl Grey. Step 4. Join the monastery, sort of. In what can only be described as a caffeine-fueled existential crisis, Arthur Googled remote British monasteries that accept runaways. He even packed a bag, which contained 2 pairs of socks, a pocket flask, and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Not exactly monk material. He made it as far as the train station before remembering he had a dentist appointment the following Tuesday and didn't want to muck up his NHS records. Step 5. The honest talk that never happened. At one point, Arthur did consider just telling the truth, saying, "I don't want to marry someone because our parents share a Waitrose membership and matching opinions on Brexit." But then he remembered he was British, and being emotionally vulnerable in public is only slightly more acceptable than chewing with your mouth open. So instead, he smiled, nodded, and offered to organize the wedding playlist, which now, suspiciously, includes Highway to Hell and I Will Survive. In the end, the Great Escape Plan wasn't a plan at all. It was a series of increasingly sad little acts of rebellion dressed in politeness, denial, and digestive biscuits. It was a man trapped by tradition, obligation, and an overpowering fear of disappointing his mother, which, in Britain, ranks just below dying alone on the list of existential horrors. But maybe, just maybe, the real escape wasn't physical. Maybe it's the quiet realization, halfway through a disappointing custard tart, that your life deserves more than being a supporting actor in someone else's pre-written play. Or maybe that's just indigestion. Either way, the plan was about as effective as a soggy crumpet. All effort, no structure, and a deeply sad texture. But we admire the attempt, Arthur. We really do. Now please, pass the gem. And the emotional numbness, thanks ever so. When everyone knows but pretends they don't. The British art of ignoring obvious disaster. Right, so here we are deep in the land of stiff upper lips, lukewarm tea, and denial so thick you could spread it on toast and call it jam. Because this, my friend, is the Great British Family Gathering, where disaster politely knocks, lets itself in, and no one says a bloody word. You see, everyone knew. They knew this engagement had all the charm of a wet sock at a wedding. But did they intervene? Raise a hand. Offer a whisper of caution between sips of lukewarm Earl Grey. Of course not. They just smiled, nodded, and doubled down on the cucumber. Sandwiches like the Titanic wasn't sinking beneath their tastefully polished loafers. Let's paint the picture. The parlor smells faintly of lavender furniture, polish and suppressed emotion. Grandma's perched on the edge of her floral armchair like a tea bag that's been used one too many times. Uncle Malcolm's pretending to read the Telegraph, but you can see the internal screaming just behind his bifocals. Even the dog looks like he's contemplating a life of freedom on a Scottish sheep farm. And there in the center, Beatrice and Arthur, the nation's most reluctant lovebirds, seated side by side like contestants in a bake-off. Episode gone tragically wrong, smiling just a bit too hard. But the most British part, the absolute Olympic-level performance of not mentioning the obvious. Because to acknowledge the disaster would be impolite. And heaven forbid we tread into the realm of emotions or, God forbid, honesty. Instead, Cousin Sheila asks, "Did you hear there's going to be rain on Thursday?" As if that's the most pressing catastrophe in the room. Yes, Sheila, rain on Thursday. How utterly shocking. No one dares say, you two don't even like each other, do you? No one asks Arthur why he flinches every time someone says wedding venue. No one tells Beatrice that smiling through her teeth doesn't actually qualify as joy. Instead, we rely on the sacred British ritual. Passive-aggressive commentary disguised as compliment. Oh, what a unique choice of engagement ring, dear. Such a modern pairing opposites do attract, don't they? My Gerald and I fought like cats and dogs the first 10 years. You'll manage. Meanwhile, everyone's watching this social souffle collapse in slow motion and doing nothing but quietly offering more Victoria sponge. Because in Britain, we don't fix the disaster. We host it. We invite it in for tea, avoid eye contact, and silently judge it while buttering scones. Arthur's uncle, who once broke off an engagement because he wasn't ready to share a bathroom, sits silently, sipping scotch and whispering to his tie. Beatrice's mother, who absolutely arranged this whole debacle with the emotional finesse of a foghorn, smiles with the serenity of someone who thinks therapy is a bit American. Smiles with the serenity of someone who thinks therapy is a bit American. And let's not forget Grandpa, who mutters something like in our day, "You just got on with it," then immediately nods off mid-sentence because denial is exhausting work. No one wants to deal with reality. The truth is loud, messy, and smells suspiciously like actual feelings, so we drown it in polite conversation, passive observations, and Yorkshire puddings the size of inner turmoil. Because in this house, emotional implosion is something you sweep under the floral carpet and politely walk around for the next 40 years. So yes, everyone knew. And no one did a thing. Because it's Britain. And if you think emotional clarity is ever on the menu, you clearly haven't been to enough Sunday roasts with this lot. The inevitable fallout, love, loss, and a lot of Earl Grey stains. So it all ended not with fireworks or a scandalous affair, but with a polite phone call and a deafening sigh that echoed through the home counties. The engagement was off, cancelled, kaput, Beatrice returned. The ring in a floral Kath Kidston tin. Because of course she did. And Arthur moved back in with his mom, where he could once again live in silent shame surrounded by decorative spoons and passive-aggressive crocheted pillows that say things like tea fixes everything. It doesn't. The family, predictably, handled it with all the emotional grace of a cucumber, sandwiched slapped against a brick wall. And Maureen claimed she always knew it wouldn't last, despite previously commissioning commemorative serviettes embroidered with A and B forever. She tried to burn them discreetly, but they melted onto the other. Uncle Bernard took it as a sign from the universe and promptly joined a birdwatching club in Kent to escape the judgment. Cousin Charlotte simply muttered typical and went back to glaring at life in general. And Sir Reginald, oh, he didn't say a word. He just sat in his armchair, sipping Earl Grey, with the intensity of a man who's lost both a chess match and his last shred of hope in one go. He gave a single nod. That was it. No rage, no sorrow, just ... Disappointment steeped to perfection. Now, you might think there'd be emotional unpacking, family meetings, a group therapy session over digestive biscuits. But this is Britain, darling. We don't confront emotions. We smother them in sponge cake and hope no one makes eye contact. Instead, the family simply carried on as though nothing had happened. Photos were quietly removed from mantelpieces, engagement party decorations mysteriously misplaced, and the wedding Pinterest board deleted faster than a pub closes at 10:59 on a Sunday. Of course, no one really moved on. They just reshuffled the drama into more socially acceptable forms. Beatrice took up gem making. Arthur pretended to enjoy cricket again. Maureen started an entirely too personal blog about emotional resilience through potpourri. Meanwhile, every family gathering since has included at least one moment where someone says, "So whatever happened to?" followed by someone else sharply whispering, "Don't bring it up. She's still not quite over it." And what of love? Well, let's just say it limped away. From the scene wearing wellies and carrying a broken umbrella, muttering something about therapy and moving to Cornwall. The fallout wasn't explosive, no dramatic exits, no broken heirlooms, just the slow, smoldering awkwardness of a family trying to emotionally detach, like they're removing a plaster covered in hair, painfully, inefficiently, and with many pauses for tea. But here's the thing, even through the heartbreak and disappointment, and endless biscuit-fueled debriefs, they stayed a family. Dysfunctional, absolutely. Passive-aggressive, like a national sport. But they still showed up for Sunday roast. They still remembered birthdays. They still asked how Arthur was doing, just not too directly, and preferably through someone else, 3 weeks after the fact. Because that's the British way. We cope, we move on. We write passive-aggressive Christmas cards and talk about the weather until the emotional sting dulls enough to laugh about it over wine and crisps. And so ends the saga, not with closure, not with clarity, but with a stubborn refusal to admit defeat. Because if there's one thing we Brits do better than falling in love, it's quietly surviving the mess we made of it, preferably with tea. So here's to love lost, lessons not learned, and family dysfunction so thick it could be spread on toast. Cheerio.